Is Epstein alive? Some people still believe Charlie Kirk is alive. Some people still believe Tupac is alive. Is anyone still alive? Is Jesus still alive? Of course, Jesus is still alive. But the question here is this cover-up of Epstein and his pedophile ring deeper than we thought? Is Epstein still amongst us? If so, why? I mean, what value could this man bring at this point? And if he does, I mean, man, that's scary. But we're going to figure this out. And hey, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that sub button. Because there's a lot of people that want to hide this information, and they don't deserve your support. So why don't you support somebody who is going to get that information? Tell you the truth.
G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing whether or not Jeffrey Epstein could still be alive. What we're going to be analyzing today are documents from the Epstein files that raise the question whether or not Jeffrey Epstein could still be alive. Ever since I started analyzing the Epstein files, I've had people commenting that he in fact is not dead, that he didn't die on August 10th. It's not something that I ever took very seriously until I started looking at some notes that were found in his prison cell. The picture you're looking at right now is actually part of a detailed escape plan. I'm going to walk you through step by step what all of this means. I've gone through and translated all of this, and by the time we're done, you'll understand why I find this so compelling. All right, let's just jump right in. For the sake of context, we're going to look at a few pictures before we actually get to the escape plans, but I think this will help you understand why they're so compelling and where they were found. Now, if you look at this right here, this is L tier. He was housed in what's called the SHU, the Special Housing Unit. L tier was the unit where he was housed. He was on the right side of this unit. He was the first door on the right. Now, as we open that door, as we go in, you can see it's disgusting, just covered in blankets, covered in sheets. And as we go down, there's part of, this was not the noose that was actually found on him. So we still don't know where that is, actually. But although that's part of it, this is part of what was found where he was the next morning. Now, the most interesting part of this cell, at least for what we're talking about today, are some notes that were found. Here's one note. Here's the second note, and that's the one I showed you at the beginning. And here is a third note. And this, I think, is...
If you have been as deep into this Epstein rabbit hole as I have, and you understand how sick and deprived and disgusting a person Epstein was, after all of those years of getting away with all the things he did, he still wanted to get out. He still wanted to escape. He didn't want to be held accountable for his crimes. There was no remorse, meaning he felt like he did nothing wrong. It's just sad. That's a shame that this is the type of person that was around some of the leaders in America of business and moguls. This was somebody they called their friend, bro. I promise you, I could never look at them the same.
Actually, the other half of the piece of paper up here. Now, these pictures had actually been released before. I knew that there was a note, but I was never able to read it because this was the angle, this was the shot that we had. And there was no amount of zooming in that could make you see more than a couple of letters here and there. It was impossible to translate, impossible to make sense of, but I was always curious what it said. So what kind of notes was Jeffrey Epstein writing in his cell? I really wanted to know. Well, fortunately, now we have the answer. Now, when you first look at this, it just looks like a mess. It's probably very, very difficult for you to read, so I've gone through and translated it. We're going to look at that in a second, but I wanted you to get a chance to see this. One of the things that's important in terms from a handwriting perspective is that I think that Jeffrey Epstein is a very impulsive person. He has really scribbly, bad handwriting, but most of it can be translated. I was able to read most of it, and once we really see all of this in context, you're going to understand why I'm calling it an escape plan. So the way that I've done this is I've gone through and typed out the words on top of this so you can see what I think it all says. And then I moved the words so it was next to them so you can see the word right next to what I think each one means so that you can decide for yourself if you agree with my assessment or if you think it actually means something else. So first, let's go through. I'm going to explain what all of this means. The translation I have here, I am very confident in. If there's anything that I'm less confident in, I will tell you. I will point out things that if I'm not sure what it says or if I'm not certain that's what it says. But if I typed it out here, I'm overwhelmingly sure that this is correct. Now I'm going to explain what everything means. And once I'm done with that, then we're going to go through and I'll let you make your own determinations if you think that I got it right. So I'm going to start with what was most obvious to me, the thing that drew my eye first. where it says red notice, and I put equals EXT. Now, if you don't know what a red notice is, that's an alert that Interpol puts out if there is a fugitive on the loose. If there's someone that is internationally wanted, a red notice notifies agencies that if this person is found, then you extradite them back to the country where they are being looked for. So that's why it says red notice equals EXT. So if there's a red notice out for him, then he will be set up for extradition. That was my first clue that if we're looking at all of this in context, that he was planning on getting out of the country. That was his goal by writing all of this down. Now, from the red notice, there is an arrow pointing back up to this main circle right here. So that means that if he's MIA in the US, in other words, if he's missing, so if he's MIA in the US, then a red notice would occur. Then a red notice would be set out by Interpol. That's what that arrow means. But if we're to look at this circle, right, MIA US, let's look at some of the various branches of this. So visas would suggest that he's going to be planning on going out of the country. He would need to fake his name. He would have to be fake visas, but he would need visas. Something I guess he was considering is that he wrote no rights, so it could be.
This guy was definitely an operative. He was definitely an agent. There's no doubt about it. This right here is something I would see in a James Bond movie. Like, and the fact that Dr. G here could break this down in such fine understanding is insane to me. Like, he must have some service background, like some government background, because what? It makes sense how he's explaining it, but how do you piece this together, man? That's insane. Yeah, now this is the thing. Remember, from what we know about Epstein, this guy was just a teacher at one point and then became a finance expert. That's the story. Who else has that story? He wasn't born into wealth, you see. So yeah, he was definitely a spy.
Depending on the country he goes to, his rights might be different. Interestingly, he wrote tourism here. Now, if he was planning on leaving the country, whether or not he would be posing as a tourist or whether or not he would be going to places that have tourism, there's some consideration about tourism because I'm pretty certain that's what that says. It either says tourism or tourist. His handwriting is so bad. You'll see in a second where the confusion is there. Now up here it says EXT tax. It could be EST tax, but I think that what this is estate tax. So in other words, if he is to die, how much money goes to estate tax, or that he's considering the estate tax right here. Another branch has banks, so obviously something that he's going to have to consider if he's going to have access to money. Now, here's one that I am somewhat less confident in, is that there's a name written here with dollar signs next to it. I put a question mark because I don't know what letter that is, but it does look like BLCH, like NIL or something like that. But this is very clearly a name and clearly associated with money. And below that, you can see it says guards. It says guards clear as day. That is 100% what this says. So whether or not that means that he needs guards, whether or not that has to do with prison guards, that's unclear, but that is very clearly stating guards right underneath this name and the dollar signs. So if we're to look at the top portion of this, if he is MIA, if he is missing, a red notice will occur. He needs to keep all of these other things in mind. These are all things that he is thinking about. Now, if you look in the top left here, you see a number of letters, M and then R with a line to T with a line to M. And then above that, it looks like either a C or an L and then a dot and then a T. I didn't label those, but I think that that's what that says. So the question is, are these different tiers within the prison where he is? Because he's in L tier, M tier is below him. Are these people's names that he's connecting from one to the other? We don't have enough information for that to be clear, but I just want to point this out. So if later on...
I think the T stands for Trump. Just saying. I'm just saying, all right? Don't shoot the messenger.
When we get more information, if somehow that makes more sense, we're going to circle back and we'll address that. Now, underneath red notice, he wrote K equals exclamation point, exclamation point. My interpretation of that is he considering whether or not, if he's dead, will there not be a red notice? Or if he gets away with him being dead, is there no red notice then? Because there are 3 exclamation points. I typed that out exactly as it's written. To the right of that are the initials LSR. And I say initials because I assume that's what those are. I couldn't find anybody in the Epstein files with those initials, or at least typing them out by those initials. I'm not sure who he might know that has those initials. When I show it to you in a minute, maybe you interpret the letters differently because his handwriting is so bad. But I feel with a high degree of confidence that says LSR, and I don't know what that means, but it's very clear. Now, interestingly, underneath.
LSR sounds like something Russian. That's just the vibe I'm getting from LSR. Like KGB, LSR. It's got to be some sort of Russian agency, I'm telling you.
Guards over here on the right, he wrote government, and I believe this says clear. So government clear. That's my best read on the second word. 100% certain it says government. I'd say 70% certain that it says clear. My interpretation, he's looking for a government where he would be clear to go. Now, interestingly, if we go back to the left, underneath LSR, it says Muslim. Now, obviously, he's Jewish, so the question would be, why is he writing Muslim? I interpret that as where he might be ending, where he's thinking about going, where he might end up. Right below it, it says AS. You could consider that Arabic states potentially, or Arab states, because if we go a little bit lower, and I know this is confusing, this is hard to follow, there's so much, but I'm trying to get...
It is adding up a bit. Because it seems like these are more sporadic thoughts. Like he's putting an idea together and he's trying to piece it down on paper, right? This isn't necessarily... I mean, it could potentially be some code that maybe somebody connected to whatever he was working for might understand. From the way he's breaking it down, if this is to be believed to be random thought that he's piecing together, naming the different countries and different associations, these all add up to seeming like a escape plan.
Flow of how he thinks about this, because down below we see Q-SA. Now there's a lot of different ways you could interpret that. Q could be a question. I think of this, if it's below Muslim and AS, it could be Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or Qatar to Saudi Arabia. That's the way I interpret those letters, because he is a very well-traveled person. He knows people pretty much everywhere. So these are not out of the question.
That would probably be the last place I would think to look for Epstein if he turned out missing. A Saudi Arabian country, given that, everybody knows him to be associated with Israel, or Arab country rather, Muslim. It seems a bit risky. I don't know, but it does make sense as an escape plan.
As far as what these potential initials could mean. Now, to the right of that, he wrote Nigeria with an exclamation point and underlined that. So now that is a country that does extradite to the U.S. So if we're to assume that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are identified, obviously there's Nigeria. These all seem like possibilities, places that he could consider going. So to summarize what we've got so far, and we've got a long way to go. At this point, he's been thinking about if he's missing in the U.S. and it's found out that he's missing, then a red notice would be applied. He would need to have all of these other things in place. If we're to go back to the left a little bit, where it says red notice, if you look below that, it says the name Mara, question mark. Now, unfortunately, I, for the life of me, cannot figure out what it says below that. It says enlist, maybe? It's so unclear. That looks like an E, an N. It's impossible to read that next letter. It looks like an S and a T. So my best guess would be that it says enlist, but that's with a very low degree of certainty. Now, I assume Mara is a name and not code for something else like Mar-a-Lago. I'm sure some people are going to go there, but that would be strange because there's two R's, and that's not really how Mar-a-Lago is spelled. But he is writing in code to some extent. So keep in mind, Mara may not be as literal as it seems. Maybe it isn't literally somebody's name. Maybe it literally is. But that's one of those things we're going to earmark. And as I continue to analyze other files in later videos, maybe we'll circle back to that.
I think the two R's is a dead giveaway that it doesn't mean Mar-a-Lago. But I definitely think the T up there means Trump, and the two M's might be associated with Mar-a-Lago. I don't like Trump, by the way.
And this, I can't read any of it. It looks like it says LSR again, but it's such a low degree of certainty I didn't type it on there. It's completely illegible. So I have to mark this off as something where I can't truly translate any of that. Now, below that, it clearly says gangsters, and below that, it clearly says extort and kidnap. So we're going from red notice, and below that it says Mara, something illegible, gangsters, then extort, kidnap. Now, what this line of thought is, I don't know if he's concerned that could happen if he ends up in the wrong country, but there's clearly some train of thought here, starting with Mara and ending with extort, kidnap. Now, if we're to go all the way to the left, to me, this looks like the name Nicole. Now, that, once again, that's not with a high degree of certainty, but I can't think of anything else that would fit there. Who Nicole is anybody's guess. There are probably people named Nicole in his orbit. There are probably multiple people named Nicole in his orbit, so I'm not going to guess it as a specific person, or I'm not.
What's interesting is the extort, kidnap part. he kind of brushed over it, but I think that absolutely could tie into his plan, his escape plan. That might have been a part of it. I mean, the thing is, that's what he was doing. As a supposed spy, that was kind of his MO, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of it. And gangsters, maybe he was connected to, some mob members or cartel members, gangsters, who knows? But I don't understand, like what would that be a part of his escape plan? To have maybe the gangsters in the prison, maybe to have them, I don't know. The thing is, he's not talking about these drawings that are next to the words. This drawing right here to the right, where he's circled with Nicole on it, it almost looks like a sink, or maybe a pathway, and then it looks like jail cells in a hole. It actually looks like a hole up here, right here. That looks like a hole. That maybe that's a part of his escape plan. Maybe Nicole is somebody, a nickname perhaps, for somebody in the prison who could help him potentially escape. I'm not sure, but it's interesting.
I'm not going to guess who it is. Sure, it's a specific person to him, but I'm not going to speculate as to which Nicole this might be. Above that, my interpretation of this picture right here is that I believe this is a little map of the United States. That's what it looks like, just a weird little sketch of the United States and a squiggly thing coming out of it. So to me, that looks like a map. And the lines may just be the bars of being in the prison cell. So there's not as much meaning in that part. Now below that, it says island and people. Now he's lived on an island. Whether or not he wants to end up on an island, this is somewhat less clear, but those are very clearly the words that are written. So I'm not going to try to interpret too much about what that means because it's its own separate idea. But now I want you to focus on the right side again. Now on the right here, we see it says jet-US prop. Now, what that means is that he's thinking about whether or not the jet that he would be traveling in is U.S. property. Epstein and his associates were obsessed with aircraft registration, jurisdiction, things like that, and that's what jet U.S. prop would be. He's thinking about whether or not the jet he's traveling in is in fact U.S. property, because that does change some things jurisdictionally, as well as whether or not there's seizure and all of these other potential issues that could come up. So the fact that he's thinking about that is important. What else is important is that jet U.S. prop was written in a different color. Most of these were written in blue ink. Jet US prop was written in black ink. Now, the reason that matters is that means that this was enough of a plan that where he wrote it out and he came back to it. It wasn't just sketched out and thrown away. He came back with additional thoughts later on. Now, below...
Yeah, potentially. That does line up. I didn't know that U.S. property jets had limitations internationally. So that is interesting, for sure. But it also shows if he came back later and he adds that means he might have came back later with confirmation of some of the earlier things he wrote about. And he has come to the conclusion of a jet now, which almost is like, okay, it almost sounds like he has confirmed some other things, came back later with an extension on the plan, because maybe he's figured how he's going to get out or where he could go. Wow. I don't know, man. He may still be out there. That's scary.
Below that, you can see this little scribbled box with the word Brad on top. I'm going to scroll up so you can see it without my comments on it. So you see it's a little square with a little building next to it. And on the left, I interpret this as an airplane. At least I believe that's what it is. Or it could be additional buildings. But it very, very clearly has the word Brad written on top. And then below it and to the right of it, you see what I interpret as supposed to be where cars and planes are parked. I think this right here is a little airplane. So when I saw this, I immediately thought it looked like a private airport because this shape and design of the building is unusual. Airports are low and they're large. It's a very distinct look. So I was curious what the closest private airport is. The closest private airport to where he was is Teterboro. It also is one of the busiest. I was curious if he'd ever actually been there, so I typed it in the Epstein files, and it showed that it's been mentioned about 7,000 times. So this is definitely one he's familiar with. It does seem to resemble at least this style of airport. I'm not insisting it is this one, but it certainly looks quite a lot like it. So if nothing else, this lends credence to the idea that this building he's drawing is a private airport. He is thinking about getting to a private airport based on everything else he's saying and getting out of there. And the name Brad is...
Now, in reality, if I'm a spy, I've been compromised and I need to get out. My plan is to fake my death somehow and to escape. I don't want to say within the same area. I'm going to want to get as far away as possible. With the amount of connections and such that he has, Dr. G here's belief is that he's weighing specifically whether he should go to specific countries. He's thinking about the laws and things like that. It's interesting that he would think about those things first versus thinking about the relationships he probably has with people in these countries that would be willing to abet his escape.
Is associated with that. Who that is that a pilot? Is that somebody who would help him get there? That's unclear, but the name Brad is very, very clearly written on top of that airport. And you may be thinking, well, he's just fantasizing about escaping, and that may be part of it. I think the unusual aspect of that is that he would put a specific name with it, that he would write a name on top of the airport. Now, as far as I know, Brad does not stand for anything. It's not an acronym for anything. I take that in a very literal sense as a name. Now, as you can see right here, a portion is redacted. All we can see is that something was underlined. I would absolutely love to know what this said, because something here is very important because it's underlined many times. But if we're to look to the right of that, it said medical/PT. Now, the way I interpret that, PT typically is shorthand for patient. It very clearly says medical. So the question would be, is that how he's thinking about being transported as a medical patient? Possibly. So if we're to scroll down a little further, we see G/computer PB, some question marks, then VI. Now, immediately when I saw this, I knew what this was referring to. PB is Palm Beach, VI is Virgin Islands. So if we're wondering what has something that he is worried about on it or something he's thinking about, it's the computer in Palm Beach. That's the one with the question marks. And just to be clear, so you know that that's actually how he would refer to his computer, I took a snippet from an email from Ghislaine Maxwell. Why do I have no sound on this computer? And it has PB in parentheses next to it because that's referring to the Palm Beach computer. So this is literally how they refer to these computers. Now, as far as the G/ goes, I interpret that, and this is my best guess. I'm trying to tell you what I think is a guess versus what seems more clear. I'm guessing that that somehow is in reference to Ghislaine Maxwell. So as far as where this PB computer is, I would assume that she is in fact the one who has it. So if we start looking at the
G/ almost seemed more like a folder. To me, being a tech guy, it sounded like more of a folder on his computer that would have a specific document or file that he's looking for. That makes more sense to me. But everything else, for the most part, lines up. I don't understand why he didn't go through some of the imagery here, because I'd say up here a lot of this stuff almost looks like it's connected in a way, right? Which he kind of did explain, but there's also a lot of key points that are probably being made here symbolically through imagery. And I think he's probably missing out on a little bit of the puzzle pieces by not going through that. But for the most part, I think he's accurate.
Now, this next document right here, I'm not going to bother reading through all this. I don't think it's of consequence, but this is basically him complaining about being in prison. But then when we flip it upside down, which is down here, it comes out with something else. This does seem a bit more relevant. So at the top, it says something about data. That's unclear, but we do have the years 2002 to 2005. We have two initials below that, which I would assume are names, but maybe they stand for something else. But once again, they are coded. He does not want this to be obvious what he's talking about. But the more significant part is directly below that. Jail out equals 10. Now that seems pretty clear. He's talking about getting out of jail. Now, what does the 10 stand for? Is he paying somebody $10 million? Is it 10 o'clock? What is 10? All we know is that he is saying jail out equals 10. And I think that's extremely consequential, particularly given the context of the other page we looked at.
I mean, the thing is, it's supposed to be coded language, but it's like almost obvious given the context of everything. And this is a note that was just left there after this supposed suicide. I don't know. I guess it wasn't meant to be released. But the thing is, if, he faked this suicide, right? Somehow, which would require, I would believe, there being a body involved, that at the very least, somebody would have to proclaim to the public that this was Epstein's body. If not a group of people would observe that. I I would think that this note would be something he would want to destroy. That's the only thing that is curious, but jail out equals 10 does sound like 10 million to get out of jail. Or, get out of jail in 10 days. Who knows? But it absolutely is code for something. This almost looks like he was on a phone call. I think that's what he said. He was on a phone call and he's writing down points. I wonder if they have audio of the phone calls he made while he was in prison. That would be insightful.
Some of this is written very clearly, but it's unclear what he's referring to. So he says nothing at all, and then the last word, straw, show. I just can't read those middle letters enough to make that make sense. So now this is the last page, blankets, AVR, and Medi, and then it says watch, exclamation point. Now this is very interesting because he had an excessive amount of blankets in his prison cell. We know that. That's very well documented. That was acknowledged in the OIG report, actually. So the fact that he had excessive blankets is a fact. AVR, the cameras were not working. So we know for a fact the cameras did not work at that time. And the last one is Medi, which is how people that think he escaped would have done it, would have been through medical. Then he says watch, exclamation point. So what is it that he's watching for? Something to do with the blankets, the AVR, or the Medi. But those are three of the big things that had to be taken care of if he was actually going to pull off something like this. So I think this page, despite the fact it's just a couple of words, could potentially be very consequential.
Yeah, there's absolutely logic to it. There's absolutely thought put behind it. And every bit of evidence that I'm seeing is like, man, this is really a cover-up, man. What's going on? Blankets, AVR, Medi? What does that mean? Other than you are trying to escape, like all of this is just more evidence of an escape. And I don't know, based off of this, I'd have to look more into the theory of why people think Epstein faked his death and has escaped. But just based off of these notes here, this is saying a lot. I want to see what the comments have to say, actually. Total non-conspiracy theorists, dead or alive, it's absurd to think it was a suicide. Too many institutional/technical failures. Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing where it's just like so blatant how much of a cover-up this has been. And it's like, damn, this dude is probably still alive, bro. Like, that just makes me so sick to my stomach. Look, G/ is a drive. I'm guessing computer PB is a file directory. That makes a lot of sense too. I didn't even realize the slash, but yeah, that's pretty accurate. A person planning an escape wouldn't kill themselves. Yeah, absolutely. That is such a great argument. A person planning an escape is not going to kill themselves. Well, I mean, I guess they could if they feel like, oh, there's no chance they can get out of here. But it's Epstein, bro. You think Bleach Ill money sign might actually say blackmail? Damn. Hold on. I think so. Dude, that does say blackmail. Now that I see it, yeah, that does look like blackmail. These comments are on fire. Worth noting, the Mara written on that page could plausibly be a reference to Judge Kenneth Mara, a federal judge in South Florida who ruled on Epstein-related cases, giving the surrounding notes about extradition, red notices, in U.S. courts. The connection makes sense. Not proof, but it's not a random name either. What? Hold on, this is getting deeper. I might have to go deeper into the rabbit hole here. What the fuck? Kenneth Mara. Whoa, is he in the Epstein files, though? Hold on. I think he said he searched Mara and couldn't find it in Epstein files, but... he's in the Epstein files. Bro, they got this book. They took the file out. That's what that means, that they took the file out. Oh, that sucks. Damn, bro, they're not letting us get the truth, man. Doe versus Epstein. 14-year-old plaintiff experienced confusion, shame, humiliation, embarrassment, and the assault sent her life into a downward spiral. A 14-year-old, bro. What happened with this case? It was 1997? Let's see. This document is not deciding guilt or innocence. It's about which court gets to hear the case. Here's... Oh, the censorship is real. ChatGPT is censoring Epstein. Man, that's crazy, bro. All right, y'all. If y'all like this video, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the sub button so I can keep exposing what's going on, man. This is starting to make me feel very uneasy. like I almost don't want to keep looking into it because it almost feels dangerous, unfortunately. But if you like the video, make sure you subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. I got a lot of Epstein videos, so make sure y'all check them out because I'm covering some stuff not everybody's covering. Peace.